The Trump administration report said, quote, "The rise in production capacity of petrochemicals is expected to outgrow domestic demand. If the industry seeks to avoid a reduction in an average utilization, surplus ethylene derivative supply will need to find export markets," unquote. Even if we pretend that exports by multinationals are worth the risks, there's a good chance that there won't be enough buyers because plenty of other countries are making ethylene too. The Asian market used to be the market that bought most of the ethylene exported from the United States, but now they're damn close to being totally self-sufficient in the ethylene department. And so why would we increase supply of something that our biggest customer no longer needs? There are also countries in this world that care about how fast the climate is changing and are not going to buy our gas or the products derived from it. And so why would we fund and risk our health for a project that would expand fracking in order to increase production of a chemical that our country already has more than enough of and that the world is shifting away from?
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 246th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. If this is your first time listening to Congressional Dish, I am a dork who has been paying really close attention to Congress now for a very long time, the better part of a decade, really. And I started this podcast because I was doing something very weird and reading bills and laws and watching hearings in my free time because, quite frankly, I didn't trust what the news was telling me. And so I just wanted to find stuff out for myself. And as I started doing that more often, I was just learning a lot about what was going on in Congress and what was being slipped into law. And I wasn't seeing these stories appear in the mainstream media. And so that was making me insane. And so I started a podcast to maybe share with, 5 people what I was finding. But it turns out that more than 5 people care. And so I'm still doing this podcast, still reading bills and laws. And today I am going to be telling you about something that I found inside of the BIF, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, which is better known as the Infrastructure Law, which was signed on November 15th, 2021. Now, I'm reading the entire law because it's law now, and I'm reading the wide margin version of the bill. So it's 2,740 pages. And buried 400 pages in, I found a rabbit hole. Basically, there is a huge potential infrastructure project that's been in the works for over 5 years. And I didn't know anything about it. And the infrastructure law moves this project forward and uses some of our tax money to do it. And so the more I learned about this project, the more I just figured it's definitely off the radar. I had no idea that anyone was even contemplating this. And so I figured that I would take the time to tell you what I found out about this project so that if you have feelings about it, you can make them known to your members of Congress. Because even though the first steps of it are funded in the infrastructure law, it is far from the finish line. You still definitely have time to make your feelings known. So the part of the new infrastructure law that I researched for you today is the part that starts the process of creating an Appalachian Storage Hub for petrochemicals. So specifically what the new law does is it allows the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is made up of a dude picked by the president and the governors of 13 states, the Appalachian states. Well, it allows that commission to make grants, so give money, and to, quote, enter into contracts or otherwise provide amounts to individuals or entities, unquote, for projects to research the economic impact of a ethane storage hub in the Appalachian region that will, quote, help establish a regional energy hub in the Appalachian region for natural gas and natural gas liquids, including hydrogen produced from the steam methane reforming of natural gas feedstocks, unquote. Now, I've already done an episode on this infrastructure bill, and this was back when it was a bill, so I didn't read it as closely as I'm reading it now. But back before it became law, I wanted to know, is this a bill that I would vote for if I was in Congress? And my conclusion for that was no. It was because of the energy provisions. And specifically, what bothered me the most about the energy provisions in the infrastructure bill, now law, was that it's committing the United States to transitioning to a hydrogen economy. And I feel like us American peasants have not been consulted in this decision. And specifically, one of the most important things that it does is that this new law is going to create 4 hydrogen hubs. So basically, grants are going to be given to states. Our federal tax money is going to be given to states. And I'm quoting from the bill to quote, accelerate commercialization of and demonstrate the production, processing, delivery, storage, and end use of hydrogen, unquote. And these hubs are going to be funded with $8 billion of our money. So this is a major infrastructure project. 2 of those hubs have to be in regions of the United States with the greatest natural gas resources, like the Appalachian region. And this is all about taking natural gas, greenwashing it, and saying like, oh, we're using the gas to make hydrogen, and then they're going to call the hydrogen clean energy. So all of this is connected. And so here I am reading the infrastructure law, and I find another hub for fossil fuels. And so that's why I went down this rabbit hole. And so for this new hub that they're contemplating, the funding for this ethane storage hub, it's authorized at $5 million a year for the next 5 years. So that's $25 million total. All things considered, that's not a huge amount of money. But this law allows funding from this law to be combined with money from, quote, any other federal program, unquote, and from, quote, any other source, unquote, which would include money from private companies or individuals. Pretty much outside money is going to flow in here, and we won't know where it's coming from or how much. It also waives any other provision of law that would limit federal funding for this research project. So basically, I don't know how much will actually be spent. I know that there will be at least $25 million of our tax money, but how much will be transferred from other federal programs, I have no way to know. And how much will come from private individuals and companies, I have no way to know. But the money spent on this research is not really the point of this story, because this is a project that some members of Congress have been trying to create for over 5 years. It's a huge infrastructure project, and it would cost us many, many billions of dollars and would carry enormous pollution risks. And so I think we should know about it. And so let's get into the details. So first of all, when we're talking about the Appalachian region, which is what this hub would be designed to coordinate petrochemicals for, we're talking about counties in Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and every county in West Virginia. This region sits on top of the Marcellus and Utica shale formations, as well as an undeveloped formation, the Rogersville Shale, which means that this region sits on top of shitloads of fossil fuel gases. Now, many of us, because I know I certainly did, became aware of all the natural gas in the Appalachian region when the Emmy Award-winning documentary Gasland came out on HBO in 2011, when the at that time, normal dude director, Josh Fox, I mean, he's a celebrity now, but at the time he was just some guy, and he was offered $100,000 for a piece of his family's land in Pennsylvania. And so instead of just selling it off and taking the cash, he took out his camera and investigated why he was being offered so much money. And it turned out that the company wanted to use a process called hydraulic fracturing to basically crack the ground under his family land in order to release and collect the gases underneath. In the documentary, Josh visits his neighbors who had already signed contracts with the fracking companies, and he documented the problems that they developed since allowing fracking to take place near their homes, including new illnesses and poisoned water. This documentary is worth your time, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'm pretty sure that it's included in the Amazon Prime catalog right now, and so I'll include a link to that in the show notes for you. But 10 years later, I think in large part due to that documentary, fracking is a word that I think most Americans are aware of, with people who make money from doing it in support of it and people who care more about clean air and water being against it. But so far, the people who make money from fracking are winning the war because if the Appalachian region were its own country right now, it would be the world's third largest producer of so-called natural gas. Now, the huge infrastructure project that will be researched with millions provided in the infrastructure law is a storage hub for a byproduct of natural gas, ethane. Ethane's used to make plastics, and over 99% of ethane in the United States is produced from natural gas, not from oil like many people would expect. To get ethane from natural gas, the gas is piped into a steam cracker, which uses, some kind of magic to separate the gas into several products. But the important one for this story today is ethylene. The ethylene that's produced by these ethane crackers, the majority of that goes to the production of polyethylene, which is the most commonly produced plastic in the world. It's used to produce plastics for like food packaging and bottles, trash bags, diapers, toys, antifreeze, siding for windows and pools, clothing, carpets, and other home improvement stuff. Globally, North America has the second largest ethylene production capacity in the world. Only the Asia-Pacific region has more. And in North America, the ethylene production facilities are mostly found on the Gulf Coast. Over 95% of them are located in Texas and Louisiana. And this is because of storage. Ethane crackers use furnaces and other complex processing gadgets that are apparently a pain in the ass to restart. And so the ethane cracker companies want ethane storage nearby so that they can have a constant supply and not have to shut down and restart the crackers. The biggest ethane storage hub in the United States is in Mont Belvieu, Texas, which is about 30 miles east of Houston. There are also smaller ones in Conway, Kansas, and Ontario, Canada. But none of these are obviously in the Appalachian region. And so a network of pipelines have already been built to deliver ethane and other similar liquefied gases that are needed to make plastics to the existing hubs in Texas, Kansas, and Canada. The idea behind the Appalachian Hub that will be researched with money from the infrastructure law, and, God only knows how many other sources, is to create a hub like the one we already have in Mont Belvieu, Texas, somewhere in Appalachia, so that the ethane can be transformed into ethylene closer to where the gas is fracked and closer to the companies in the Appalachian region who don't want to pay as much for the products that they need to make plastics because they have to pay a lot to get them schlepped to Texas and back. So when it comes to the hub itself, here's an idea of the kind of facilities that would all be located together in this Appalachian storage hub if it were to be built. So they would need to build natural gas processing plants, which produce the natural gas, mainly methane. Yes, the same methane that changes the climate many times faster than carbon dioxide, and the so-called Y-grade natural gas liquids such as gasoline, ethane, propane, butane, and other tanes. A lot of the gas produced in the Appalachian region is the kind that best produces all the wide-grade kinds of natural gas liquids, the plastic-creating kind, which is why the plastics and chemical industries are so interested in having a hub like this in the Appalachian region. And to that end, the hub would also have to have fractionators, which are facilities that separate the natural gas liquids into ethane, propane, gasoline, et cetera, et cetera. It would also have to have ethane crackers, which separate the ethane created by the fractioners into ethylene, the chemical needed to make plastics, along with other products, such as the hydrogen. And it would also have to have storage facilities. So like I said before, it's an expensive pain in the ass to stop and restart an ethane cracker. And so storage containers for lots of ethane would be created to save the ethane cracker companies the hassle and expense of stopping and restarting their facilities. In Mont Belvieu, Texas, our nation's largest existing hub, in Conway, Texas, and in the Canadian hub, the storage facilities are all in underground salt formations. And then to connect all of these facilities to each other and to locations in the rest of the world, we would need transportation infrastructure. A lot of this would be pipelines, but we can also move some of this with rail, trucking, and shipping. But when it comes to ethane, it's not very often that it's transported by rail because ethane requires crazy cold temperatures or super high pressures to keep that gas as a liquid. And so the companies would have to pay for specially designed tanks to make it work on rail or really with trucking, which means that most of the ethane in this country is transported by high pressure pipelines. To get the ethane and its byproducts overseas, Medium-sized ships that can handle the required containers can load at a port in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania, which is on the Delaware River, southwest of Philadelphia on the Delaware border. However, there are enormous ships that can carry these natural gas liquids, and those pick up from the Houston Ship Channel in the fossil fuel waste dump known as Trinity Bay in Texas. Now, the benefits to industry of having another hub like this are clear, because almost a third of U.S. activity in 13 petrochemical industries takes place in the Appalachian region. And the people who make money in those industries would like to eliminate the shipping costs associated with getting the products that they need from Texas, Kansas, or Canada. Basically, cheaper costs for what they need means more money in their pockets. The infrastructure law is one of those, crazy long monster bills that combine so much into one bill that it's tough to tell which companies were lobbying for which provisions. But the bill that is closest to the one that became law as part of the infrastructure law, the Appalachian Storage Hub Study Act, that was lobbied for by the American Chemical Council, the lobbying organization for the chemical industry. It was also lobbied for by the National Propane Gas Association and by Royal Dutch Shell. And Royal Dutch Shell is notable because in 2016, Shell announced that it was going to build an ethane cracker plant in Monica, Pennsylvania, which is 30 miles northwest of Pittsburgh on the bank of the Ohio River. Now, fast forward 6 years, and that ethane cracker plant is almost complete. Now, Shell won't tell anyone how much it's costing them to build, but it's in the neighborhood of $6 to $10 billion. Shell said they wanted to build the plant in that location to be close to their customer base because 70% of the companies that use polyethylene to make plastics are within 700 miles of Pittsburgh. And this Appalachian Storage Hub project is all about lowering costs for the gas and plastics industries. There's no doubt about it. And so the fact that Shell was lobbying for this, it just fits the puzzle now, doesn't it? But this is also a scheme to set up financial industry fuckery. Because if this storage hub in Appalachia is completed, ideally for those pushing it, the new Appalachian hub would eventually become a trading hub, just like the Mont Belvieu, Texas hub already is. Regardless of how you feel about this clear corporate favor in the infrastructure law, everything I've talked about in regards to this project at least makes sense up until this point. You can understand why the storage is wanted near the ethane crackers. You can understand why the companies would want the crackers closer to where the plastics are made. There are products that need to be made and delivered. It's a market that makes sense. But then the free marketeers and the parasitic financial industry get involved and start gambling, and basically they want this new hub to enable their casino-loving ways. Because a hub like the one being contemplated and the one that already exists in Texas that gets big enough to become a trading hub not only balances physical supply and demand, but it can also be used for financial risk management, which means betting on the future prices of the products that are made in the hub. So, for example, the companies that make the natural gas liquids can not only deliver their ethane supplies to the hub, but if it's also a trading hub, they can also buy so-called put options, which are bets that hedge against possible price declines in the future. The buyers of ethane can similarly buy so-called call options to hedge against possible price increases. And it's not just the people that are involved in the actual trading of the ethane that can be in this game. Other people, companies, bankers, funds, they can all get in on the bets on future pricing too. But this isn't all about subsidizing already wildly profitable and environmentally damaging industries, or for creating a new casino for the banksters, even though those are big parts of this. But there is a legit problem with having over 95% of the country's ethylene production capacity clustered in Texas and Louisiana. Because in February of 2021, during that storm that knocked out the power to a good chunk of Texas and the surrounding states, I did a whole episode about it, episode 231. That storm knocked out power to the plants in Texas and Louisiana that make ethylene and polyethylene, which caused the cost of plastics to rise in the United States. If those products could be made elsewhere, there probably wouldn't have been so severe a price shock. Beyond prices, they say that an extended outage could also cause supply shortages in products that we use every day, meaning these plastic things. Now, that could be an argument for two things. It could be an argument for spending many billions of dollars and risking all kinds of pollution in Appalachia to build another giant hub for the benefit of plastics industries. Or it could be an argument for not depending on plastic so much, an argument for reimagining how we package products, reducing the amount of plastic we need, and creating new industries that can create products without plastics. But as far as arguments for why us normies might want to support the creation of another massive industrial chemical hub, this is the most compelling one for me. It doesn't seem wise to have an entire industry dependent on one location. But that said, looking at the situation for the normies living near the first massive hub in Mont Belvieu, their situation presents some pretty compelling arguments against creating a hub in Appalachia. Mont Belvieu is a small town with a population of about 5,600 people, covering approximately 14 square miles, about 30 miles east of downtown Houston. And during my lifetime, the residents of Mont Belvieu have suffered quite a few negative consequences of living so close to this petrochemical hub. The site became a storage hub for petrochemicals in the 1950s and was expanded in the 1970s. By the time I was born in the early 80s, the residents of Mont Belvieu were living on top of an underground storage facility holding up to 100 million barrels of petrochemical poisons. From the beginning, the residents of Mont Belvieu had to endure some serious consequences of allowing the petrochemical industry to move into their town. The first major explosion took place in 1958, when an explosion caused by an oil company blew up a family's home. In 1970, there was a big gas leak and a fire. In 1976, a rail car carrying petrochemicals nearby exploded. In 1980, an underground gas storage facility leaked. Now, the town found out about the leak when a woman's dishwasher filled with gas, and both she and her home caught fire. She and 72 other families had to evacuate their homes, and some of them couldn't go back for 7 months. 4 years after that, in 1984, a pipeline exploded, and the resulting fire burned down someone's home and damaged 4 other buildings. 2 years after that, in July 1986, brine, which is water with 5 times as much salt as ocean water, leaked from the Mont Belvieu storage facility and into the town's drinking water. After all of that, the city of Mont Belvieu published a warning to anyone considering moving to Mont Belvieu. They published a warning telling the public that they faced, quote, serious danger and possible death, unquote, if they moved to the main part of their own town. The situation got so bad that eventually the entire downtown had to move. The downtown of Mont Belvieu is now 2 miles east of where it used to be. On top of that, about 200 families, some of whom had lived in Mont Belvieu since 1890, were bought out of their homes by the companies in the petrochemical industry, and they were moved to a new subdivision further away from their poisonous, flammable, underground storage facility and occasionally exploding chemical transportation infrastructure. But the accidents didn't stop. On April 7, 1992, a pipeline connected to the salt cavern storage unit full of chemicals leaked gas, and that gas settled and built up at the bottom of a small Mont Belvieu valley overnight. In the morning, the gas exploded and instantly killed a 5-year-old boy. A mother and daughter died a few days later from their injuries. On February 8, 2011, a natural gas liquid fractionation plant exploded, killing a worker and burning a bunch of cars that were parked outside. And then there are all the health consequences that are not as obvious to see as explosions. Like I said before, to keep gases like ethane in liquid form, it requires a lot of pressure. But sometimes there can be too much pressure, and when that happens, the petrochemical storage facilities will flare some of the gas, which is when they burn the gas. The companies will also flare gas when they're starting up or shutting down their equipment. Now, these flares have no pollution controls. The companies do have ways to control the pollution, but they often choose not to control it and just set flares because flares are easier and cheaper for them. They don't care that burning large quantities of gas makes our climate more and more unpredictable and poisons the air for all of the breathers nearby by creating unhealthy levels of smog. But it's actually worse than smog for the people who live right next to the flares, like the residents of Mont Belvieu. The flares at chemical storage facilities and natural gas plants are often burning legit poisons, like benzene and heavy metals and black carbon. And the health effects are pretty much all bad. Lung damage, cancers, neurological disorders. And studies have shown that pregnant women who live near flares have higher odds of giving birth to preemies. In 2019 alone, the Mont Belvieu complex got caught 17 times emitting large amounts of pollution by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And flaring is pretty much unregulated. So these events, these 17 events, these were more than just flares. Flares are just common practice in the deregulated corporate wasteland known as the United States. So there is good reason, quite a few good reasons, to fear serious, sometimes deadly consequences of allowing a chemical storage and transportation hub to be constructed anywhere near your home. And those fears would be based on the actual history of the residents who allowed a chemical storage hub in their own Texas town. These dangers are not theoretical. They are proven. And in the hearing that I watched from 2016 about the Appalachian Storage Hub idea, these dangers were not mentioned once. Instead, this was the focus. Now, the person you're going to hear is Brian Anderson. He was called as a witness, and he is a West Virginia native and chemical engineer who, as a member of West Virginia University's faculty, established the West Virginia University Energy Institute in 2014, where he pushed for the idea of the Appalachian Storage Hub. In November 2018, President Trump's energy secretary, oil-loving former Texas Governor Rick Perry, appointed this guy, Brian Anderson, to be the director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, the federal government's leading fossil energy research center. And so here's Brian Anderson as a witness, representing West Virginia University's Energy Institute. Now, this is before he got the job in the Energy Department during the Trump administration. But here he is at a field hearing in West Virginia, put together and attended by a bipartisan pair of West Virginia senators, Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. This was from August of 2016.
The goal of this project is to provide essential data to support the development of the chemical manufacturing industry, promoting economic development. As evidenced by the industry's commitment to our project, developing storage and transportation infrastructure is a critical pathway to developing the industry in the region. Subsurface storage and distribution and a network of pipelines will benefit both the raw material producers, the upstream oil and gas industry, as well as the chemical industry by fostering a readily available and reliable network and source of natural gas liquids. Developing a predictable price point of the commodity in the region. Currently, there is only one spot pricing hub for natural gas liquids in the United States, and it's on the Gulf Coast. And thirdly, promoting regional investment in a more robust ecosystem for the industry.
Industry. The conversation was all about industry. Here's Brian Anderson again.
With current ethane production rates in the basin at around 500,000 barrels per day, the resource is certainly sufficient to support a renewed and robust chemical industry. That is, as long as there is modern and robust energy transportation infrastructure to support that.
They want the infrastructure to support the industry. And to further understand the goals and the beneficiaries of this project, here's some testimony from Stephen Hedrick from, again, the only hearing that I know of that's ever taken place about the Appalachian Storage Hub. Stephen Hedrick, at the time of his testimony, was the president and chief executive officer of the Mid-Atlantic Technology Research and Innovation Center, a nonprofit research company. And here is what he told our senators from West Virginia.
Rather than exporting additional ethane available via pipeline to the United States Gulf Coast, Europe, Asia, or even Canada, it could be utilized here in the Appalachian Basin, here in America, to maximize the value potential of our raw materials. According to the publication Natural Gas Intelligence, ethane accounts for more than 50% of the typical NGL barrel in the Appalachian region. And with exports now leaving Marcus Hook near Philadelphia, ethane production has been increasing in the region. In fact, midstream company MPLX's CEO, Gary Heminger, recently said, with incremental ethane takeaway projects and the projected completion of a regional cracker facility, we anticipate reaching full utilization of our existing facilities. In other words, we need more infrastructure, and companies like Shell need more elasticity in the supply chain in order to maximize the benefit of ethane.
Shell, the company that had just announced that same year, 2016, that it would be building an ethane cracker plant on the banks of the Ohio River. Shell was creating the first piece of the hub and needed infrastructure to help make their investment worthwhile. And that investment is scheduled to be complete within the next year or two. Shell's 2016 announcement that they would be building an ethane cracker was the spark that lit the Appalachian Storage Hub flame. It was after that announcement that people in Washington, D.C. started studying the Appalachian geology for salt and rock formations to find suitable underground locations for a chemical storage hub. And Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia started working on getting funding for that hub. It all went down like this. The research company headed by Stephen Hedrick, who you just heard as a witness at the hearing that Manchin co-hosted, well, the company he was in charge of partnered with West Virginia University's Energy Institute, the arm of the university that Brian Anderson, the other witness at that field hearing, created. They called their partnership the Appalachian Development Group. Its purpose was to advocate for and develop the Appalachian Storage Hub. Senator Joe Manchin then helped the newly formed Appalachian Development Group get in contact with the Energy Department's Loan Programs Office. Now, this was during the Obama administration, and Joe Manchin is a Democrat. This office in the Energy Department is supposed to give loans and loan guarantees, which are promises to banks that if the company they give money to can't pay back the loan, our tax money will pay it back instead. Well, this office at the Energy Department is supposed to give loans and loan guarantees for clean energy projects. Despite the project clearly, by any reasonable standard, not being clean or for energy, Senator Joe Manchin got the Appalachian Development Group in the door at the Energy Department. And their application for an almost $2 billion loan guarantee for the project that they named the Appalachian Storage and Trading Hub, well, that application made it past the first round of the process in the Trump administration's Energy Department in 2019. But what happened from their loan from there is really unclear. Like I said, the Appalachian Development Group is applying for a loan from an office that is supposed to be guaranteeing funds for clean energy projects, an office that has rarely provided funding for fossil energy projects, which this hub most certainly is. So that's one hurdle. A hurdle, by the way, that Senator Joe Manchin also tried to help with. In 2017, Senator Joe Manchin introduced the Capitalizing on American Storage Potential Act, which would have made the Hub project and others like it legally eligible for Department of Energy loan guarantees that are supposed to be for clean energy projects. His bill died in the 115th Congress, but I'm sure the gas and plastics industries appreciated his efforts. But as for the loan guarantee application that was in progress during the Trump years for the Appalachian Storage and Trading Hub, its status is simply unknown. In 2019, Stephen Hedrick, as the CEO of the Appalachian Development Group, said he was still working to complete the application. But since then, his company has refused to answer any more questions about their application or even answer any basic questions about the project that they're trying to get a tax money guarantee for, like how big the project will be, how much it would cost, and where it would be located, which is a pretty key question for me. Now, President Trump's Energy Secretary Rick Perry used our tax money to produce a report for Congress about the idea of an Appalachian storage hub for petrochemicals, and it identified 3 ideal locations. 3 locations identified, by the way, by the West Virginia University Energy Institute, the organization started by that guy you just heard from, Brian Anderson, who Rick Perry would bring into the Trump administration 2 years later. But the 3 locations that the study listed as ideal were the Kanawha River Valley in West Virginia, where the authors of the study said, quote, comprises the most storage opportunities of any prospect evaluated for this study, unquote. There's also an area south of Pittsburgh that includes portions of southeastern Ohio, southwestern Pennsylvania, and north central West Virginia. And then there's also a strip of West Virginia that runs along the west side of Pittsburgh towards Youngstown, Ohio, an area that includes both sides of the Ohio River, and that's where the Shell ethane cracker plant already is. And I just want to note that all 3 of these areas would put chemical processing plants, ethane crackers, and pipelines under major rivers, aka sources of drinking water. Here's Stephen Hedrick, the CEO of the Appalachian Development Group, testifying in 2016.
We would propose that the corridors naturally created by the Ohio and Kanawha rivers be utilized as a platform for a substantial pipe system that will support the distribution of key raw material and intermediate constituents, including but not limited to methane, ethane, ethylene, propane, propylene, and chlorine, all of which are significant building blocks to the petrochemical industry and hence our society. We therefore must have substantial underground storage of the highest value and broadly used raw materials, specifically ethane, ethylene, and propane, and butane if we're able, and create a built-for-purpose Appalachian Storage Hub. This can be safely and efficiently done in naturally occurring underground caverns, in depleted natural gas extraction points, or even in depleted salt domes. In fact, the brightest minds in geological formations are currently studying the best locations for the hub.
And you just heard the three that they came up with. I also want to note that all three of those locations involve West Virginia. And sure enough, it's West Virginia's lawmakers that have been pushing for this project in Congress. The bill that became law as a piece of the infrastructure law was written by Representative David McKinley, a Republican congressman from West Virginia. He's been trying to get us taxpayers to pay to research this idea for 3 consecutive Congresses, and he hasn't been working on this alone. In the 115th Congress, both David McKinley and Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia introduced a similar bill to the one that became law called the Appalachian Storage Hub Study Act of 2017. And in fact, in the hearing that I watched from 2016 that Shelley Moore Capito was the chairman of, she bragged about trying to dingleberry that into an energy bill.
So using ethane from natural gas as a feedstock means that chemical companies can choose to operate in West Virginia due to the enormous benefits of being right on top of the resource. That's why, again, I included language in the energy bill that would require the Department of Energy and Commerce to conduct a study to look at the feasibility of an ethane storage and distribution hub here in Appalachia, in West Virginia or in the region.
But the West Virginia lawmakers were not done. Now, I already told you about that bill introduced that same year by Senator Joe Manchin, which would have made the dirty-ass fossil poison chemical hub project and others like it eligible for Department of Energy loan guarantees that are supposed to be for clean energy projects. You should know that Representative David McKinley introduced that same bill in the House of Representatives. Then, after that Congress was over and none of those bills became law, in the 116th Congress, Senator Joe Manchin introduced the Appalachian Energy for National Security Act, which would have ordered a rigged study on the hub project from a national security perspective, requiring the study to look into benefits the hub would provide to national security and the risks posed by not doing it. And then that same year, in 2017, Senator Shelley Moore Capito introduced the Appalachian Energy and Manufacturing Infrastructure Revitalization Act, which would have rushed the permits for the hub. But we now know that more recently, as confirmed by Keith Schneider and ProPublica, that the person taking the lead and pushing for this Appalachian Storage Hub project in this Congress has been Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. When asked about his concerns about the dangers experienced in Mont Belvieu caused by pretty much the same project he was proposing for his own constituents' neighborhoods, he refused to address them at all. Instead, Joe Manchin said, quote, "I'm committed to the development of the proposed Appalachian Storage Hub, particularly in this moment for its economic development benefits for rural West Virginia, the greater Appalachian region, and our entire nation," unquote. Which is political weasel wording for, I only care about the money that can be made by rich titans of industry like me and my family members. Because in case you didn't know, Joe Manchin is the founder of a private coal company that his son has been running ever since Daddy Joe became a politician. Although Joe still owns millions of dollars in his coal company's stock and collects dividends from it every year. Joe Manchin's daughter is Heather Manchin Bresch, who was a featured main character in a Congressional Dish episode, number 134, because she was hauled into Congress as the CEO of Mylan Incorporated, a company that under her leadership was price gouging Americans with severe allergies by raising the price of life-saving EpiPens by over 600% just because they could. The Manchin family is literally one of the greediest, corporately corrupted families in America. And to prove it, let's just take a quick look at Senator Manchin's campaign contributions, because they are gross. For this upcoming election, Joe Manchin is the member of Congress who has taken the most money from people in the coal, natural gas, mining, and oil and gas industries. All of those being generous industries when it comes to legal bribes for politicians. They give the most money to Joe Manchin. And over the course of his Senate career, Joe Manchin's campaign has accepted at least $1.7 million that we know of from just the oil and gas industry alone. Here's Joe Manchin in that 2016 hearing.
In 2016 Annual Energy Outlook, the EIA projected that even in a clean power plant scenario, coal and natural gas will make up approximately half of our electric generation mix in 2040. We talk about deniers. There's those who deny that there's climate change going on. And there's those who deny that we're going to be needing fossil for the next 2, 3, or 4 decades.
That's who Joe Manchin is. And it's no secret in these United States that Joe Manchin has been able to get his way on all legislation this year, holding the Democratic Party's agenda hostage since the minute President Biden took office. His oily hands were all over the infrastructure law. So to find that $25 million in tax money plus unlimited amounts allowed from other sources will be spent studying, setting the groundwork for his pet project, I obviously can't prove it, but I'm blaming this dingleberry's inclusion on him. But the research for the hub being funded by the infrastructure law doesn't mean that it will ever get built. The only thing I think we can conclude will happen is that in a couple of years, there will be research published talking about how great an Appalachian Storage Hub would be for the country and region. And I think that's a foregone conclusion because of how the law structures the research. The infrastructure law doesn't order the Biden administration to conduct the research or even to contract out the research to the private sector. Instead, the research will be funded and the contracts to conduct the research awarded by the Appalachian Regional Commission. That commission, again, is co-chaired by one person selected by the president, the other co-chair is selected by the governors of the Appalachian states, and the rest of the commission is made up of those governors. Right now, the co-chair selected by the governors is Republican Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland. And despite being a Republican, which is a party that I have personally witnessed in Congress, that has been writing laws to benefit the fossil fuel industry for as long as I've been paying attention. Well, despite being a member of that party, Governor Hogan has actually proven himself to be more considerate of environmental factors in his decision-making. For example, he recently voted against a proposed gas pipeline that would have been built under the Potomac River and therefore threatened the drinking water of about 6 million people. That was after intense and sustained public pressure to kill the pipeline. But the point is that he's not a typical Republican when it comes to rubber stamping the hopes and dreams of the fossil fuel industry. However, the other co-chair, the one ironically selected by the so progressive Joe Biden administration, well, the other co-chair is, get this, Gail Connolly Manchin, Senator Joe Manchin's wife. So how do you think she's going to feel about the Appalachian Storage Hub? And then there's the rest of the commission, which is dominated by Republican politicians. There's 8 Republicans to 4 Democrats. And so when I think about that $25 million of our tax money, plus God only knows how much private money will be spent on this research, my crystal ball says that the research, which will be contracted out by Joe Manchin's wife and friends, I think it's safe to conclude that it's likely to be conducted by people predisposed to support the idea of an Appalachian Storage Hub because of the people who are going to be ordering these studies. And so that will come out, but then what, No matter what the tax money funded research concludes, there are some indisputable facts that will make the Appalachian Storage Hub difficult to actually build. Facts so indisputable that even the study created by the fossil fuel corrupted Trump administration had to discuss them. One of the factors is that, first of all, constructing the hub will obviously be expensive. The Shell ethane cracker alone, the one that's almost finished, that one is reported to cost somewhere between $6 and $10 billion. To build a hub on the scale of the Mont Belvieu hub, we would need to build gas processing plants and fractionation plants and the huge chemical storage facilities and underground caves. We'd probably need more ethane crackers and plants for processing the other chemicals and all the transportation infrastructure, including a lot of pipelines to move all the gas and liquids and chemicals around. And with all that new industry, we would need new power plants to handle the increased electricity demand and new roads to handle all of the increased activity in whatever towns are in line to be poisoned with all this new gas and plastic processing. And when you look at the big picture of all of this, will people make money from it? Oh, yes, there will be jobs. But those jobs will have to be subsidized by our tax money to make this happen. As has already been proven with this new infrastructure law, the private sector isn't even funding the research phase of this themselves. So it's going to cost us a lot of money. That's guaranteed. And then there's this madness. As admitted even by the Trump administration, We are already producing more ethylene in the United States than we need and are projected to continue doing so until at least 2040. And this is without any new infrastructure at all. The Trump administration report said, quote, "The rise in production capacity of petrochemicals is expected to outgrow domestic demand. If the industry seeks to avoid a reduction in an average utilization, surplus ethylene derivative supply will need to find export markets," unquote. So let's remember this when we hear how important an Appalachian Storage Hub would be for our domestic industry. The industry already has more petrochemicals than they need. The plastics industry in the Appalachian region simply want to pay less for those products. They want to lower the shipping costs for their materials. But the purpose of increasing production of the chemicals that make plastics is to increase exports of those chemicals and their plastics. You know, how does increased exports by multinational chemical and plastics corporations help the American people? Well, I'll tell you, for the vast majority of us, it doesn't. We assume the risks to our homes, to our air, to our drinking water, and most of us will not benefit at all, just like the residents in Mont Belvieu who don't make money by working at the petrochemical hub. The Americans who benefit from this are those that make money in the industry through their jobs, although even those people have to live nearby and they do assume the physical risks. But they will benefit too from the money. But most of the benefits will be reaped by people wealthy enough to own those multinational corporations' stock. But you know, let's just take a beat and say that we are yacht-owning super douchebags like Joe Manchin and his family, who think that what's good for stockholders is good for the world. And let's say that we support creating this giant storage and trading hub so that the gas and plastics industries can export the chemicals we risk our health for around the world for profit. Let's wander into that fantasy land for just a few minutes. Even if we pretend that exports by multinationals are worth the risks, there's a good chance that there won't be enough buyers because plenty of other countries are making ethylene too. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, North America is number 2 in ethylene production. The Asian countries are number 1. The Asian market used to be the market that bought most of the ethylene exported from the United States. But now they're damn close to being totally self-sufficient in the ethylene department. And so why would we increase supply of something that our biggest customer no longer needs? There are also countries in this world that care about how fast the climate is changing and are not going to buy our gas or the products derived from it. So Ireland, for example, is considering banning fracked gas. The French government has already blocked a contract to buy liquefied natural gas from the United States multinationals because we allow uncontrolled methane emissions, like from flaring. The International Energy Agency's Net Zero by 2050 energy sector plan, published less than a year ago, concluded that the world should add, quote, "no new oil and gas fields approved for development," unquote. And I read an International Energy Agency report just a few years ago, and they were calling gas a bridge fuel. Now they are saying no more gas. So things are changing in this world. And so why would we fund and risk our health for a project that would expand fracking in order to increase production of a chemical that our country already has more than enough of and that the world is shifting away from? And that, of course, is if we can even get the ethylene to them in the first place. Like I explained before, to move ethane around, which you need to make the ethylene, they turn it into a liquid and move it to special ships. All of this movement is done via pipelines. You may have noticed that new pipelines in the United States are facing enormous pressure from, well, people like me. I'm very proud to have gotten arrested in 2011 in front of the White House to stop the Keystone XL Pipeline, because the Keystone XL Pipeline would have used our country as a pathway for a multinational corporation based in Canada to get their fossil fuels from Canada to Texas to export around the world. We assumed all of the risks to rivers running from Canada to the Gulf Coast for the benefit of shareholders of TransCanada. That. I am so happy that pipeline project never got built and to have played a part in that. And I am not alone. Since then, there have been protests to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Potomac Pipeline. So many pipelines. Pipelines are not rubber stamped in the United States anymore. We've had too many explosions, like the one in San Bruno, California, that blew up an entire neighborhood. And we've had too many spills, like the one that poisoned the Kalamazoo River. The pipelines that would need to move all of the extra gas and liquefied gas around, they will not be easy to get permitted. And sure enough, corporations are pulling their pipeline projects, even the ones that seem like they're winning. They're pulling these projects all over the Appalachian region. So, for example, the 600-mile Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which would have moved gas from West Virginia to North Carolina, that was killed in 2020 by its two developers, which had spent $3.4 billion on that project already. And they said that they killed the pipeline because of costs of lawsuits were factored into that decision. Another pipeline that was killed is the 125-mile Constitution Pipeline, which would have moved gas from Pennsylvania to New York. That project was abandoned in February 2020 with environmental opposition as a key reason, even though it had already gotten approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 2014. And then another pipeline that was recently killed is the 116-mile Penn East Pipeline. That would have moved gas from Pennsylvania to New Jersey and was killed in September 2021, even though the developers had won a legal case in the Supreme Court, which gave those developers undeniable permission to run their pipeline across the Appalachian Trail. When they killed the pipeline, they said it was partially because they couldn't get some of the permits they needed from the state of New Jersey because their pipeline couldn't meet the standards set by the Clean Water Act. Pipelines are getting harder and harder to build in this country if they're containing fossil fuels. What makes the Joe Manchins of this Congress think that it's going to get any easier to build them, especially if the justification for it is a storage and trading hub modeled after an existing facility so dangerous that an entire town had to be moved? We do have other options other than building an Appalachian storage and trading hub. One is obviously that we could just not. We have all the ethylene that we need already. And so we could just tell the gas industry to keep using the infrastructure they already have to keep sending their products to Mont Belvieu for processing, which is an area that is already ruined by fossil fuel infrastructure. And if the lights go out again in Texas, we will pay more for plastics for a while. We also know that other parts of the world are producing plenty of ethylene too, and we can import some. And so the idea that the plastics industry would grind to a halt, I now know is absurd. The biggest risk is higher prices, and I can live with that. We also have the option of transitioning away from using plastic so much. Instead of creating jobs in the petrochemical industry, we could create jobs creating products with renewable sources. Wood, hemp, bamboo, I don't know. I don't make things. But jobs are created when goals are funded. And so we can choose sustainable goals instead of expanding industries the world is trying to move away from. Take climate change out of it if you want to, just economically. It's stupid to invest in creating products that the rest of the world doesn't want or need to buy, whatever their reasons are for not wanting them. And that's precisely what an Appalachian Storage and Trading Hub would do. But because the research for this project was funded hundreds of pages deep in an infrastructure bill that wasn't carefully debated by Congress or read by the millionaires who feed us talking points instead of news, this project is now moving forward. It's in the research stage now, but it is moving, and our tax money is subsidizing it. These are the decisions that are made when no one is watching. Decisions made by corrupt members of Congress paid by industry to fund projects for industry with our money. But this project is not set in stone. It would be a massive infrastructure project and investment and decision about the direction of our economy if we let it move forward. But we have power where there's an if and when there's an election, like there is this year. And so if you have any thoughts about any of this, 202-224-3121. That is the number you can call to contact your members of Congress and tell them how you feel. On issues flying this low under the radar, even a few phone calls can make a big impact. So this is the part of the show where I generally explain how the show makes money, because you just listened to a lot of information. You didn't hear any ads, and that's on purpose. And yet this is my full-time job. And this is usually the part of the show where I thank the people who pay for it, the producers, and explain the value for value business model, where it's basically the honor system. I provide something for you up front and for free, and you pay whatever you think is fair. So I should just thank you to all producers. I love you and I need you. But today I do feel like I need to talk to the people who don't pay for the show, the people that I called freeloaders at the end of the last episode. And I want to apologize to you for calling you freeloaders. I shouldn't call names. And it was bitchy. It was bitchy. And the thing is that sometimes I get bitchy when I'm frustrated and scared. And that came out in the last episode because right now I am frustrated and scared. I'm making a lot of changes to Congressional Dish at the moment, and all of these changes are costing me money. You know, back when I was working totally for free on this podcast, making no money for myself by producing this show, which was the case for 5 years. You know, back then it wasn't so scary to make changes because I literally had nothing to lose. But now I do. Right now I'm earning a middle management level personal income. And I'm sitting here knowing that I'm turning 40 next month. And I know that I'm still down hundreds of thousands of dollars in income from all those years of building this show. But the reality is that now, as of a few years ago, I am putting money in my personal account and I'm not being a freeloader in my own family because husband Joe pulled all the financial weight for us for years. And I'm risking that now. I don't want to feel like a freeloader, which is why I was pretty loose with that term. You know, right now I'm reinvesting in the show, just like I did when I started it, putting my own financial security on the line and betting that it will work out. And that's scary. I'm investing in research time, but that meant cutting the thank you episodes. And I'm scared that payments from existing producers will stop flowing in. I'm investing in a professional archivist to make the show notes easy to use, well organized, and as useful as possible. She is wonderful, and I am happy to pay her, but it's costing me money. I'm also investing in transforming some of the podcast episodes into videos to expose this information to a new audience that prefers video to audio. I'm going to have some stuff to show all of you right after I release this episode, and I'm excited. We have the Ukraine episode. We have a full-length version of that in video form, and then we're also cutting some pieces of that for people to share since it appears we might be on the brink of war with Russia over Ukraine. So that video is done. I'm going to get to share it with you really soon. I'm excited about these changes, but these changes cost me money. And that's on top of the money that I already have to spend. You know, I pay for editors and website security and all those things that no one ever thinks about that are necessary for putting a podcast into the world, like hosting for the websites and hosting for the show itself. And like I said, after many years of lost income building this show, I've been able to make an okay living for myself for a few years now. And here I am again with no idea how much I'm going to have for myself for this upcoming year. Now, my husband remains the best and he is employed and he's doing great and he is patient and he believes in the show. Like, we still have Joe and I know that I'm going to be okay. This is not an existential kind of scared, but it's still scary to double down on the podcast again on the faith that the audience will support it with no guarantee that that's actually the case. And that anxiety has led to some frustration because I know I can see the numbers that the vast majority of the people who listen to this show, thousands of people who have listened for many years, haven't ever paid me a penny. And if I'm being realistic about it, probably never will. And the chances are, based on the numbers, that you're one of them. And honestly, that hurts. I was a waitress on and off for 13 years. And when I think about that dynamic of people, you know, taking my work and never paying for it, it feels to me when I dwell on that, like serving someone a meal, being very friendly and having a good interaction and not getting a tip. And it sucks every time that happens. But most of the time, I'm able to brush that off. I'm able to focus on and be thankful for the people who do pay for the show, my wonderful producers. But sometimes the side of me that I'm not proud of comes out and I get bitchy and I call you names like freeloaders. And I really am sorry. Because I understand that I'm asking you to do something that isn't normal. I understand that you're accustomed to getting podcasts for free and just using your skip button to get past the advertisements that pay for those podcasts. And I understand that I've made the choice to not accept advertising money and that you might feel like my choice is not your problem. I really do understand that. I'm thinking that maybe you don't understand that this particular podcast cannot accept advertising and be the same show. It is not an option here. You know, I didn't set out looking for this when I started reading bills and laws back in 2012 and telling you what I found. But what I have found over and over again, consistently now for the better part of a decade, is a terrifying amount of corporate servitude in our Congress. And when it comes to our ability to learn about it as a country, we're not being informed about so much of what's going on because our lawmakers on the national level have designed an entire campaign and media ecosystem that's based on the legal bribery of themselves. And the money that they collect is then used to pay the corporate media to air ads. Our lawmakers have become valuable customers of our national press. The press serves them, their customers, our lawmakers. And so when their customers do shady shit, the press that accepts ads, they are financially incentivized to simply not tell you those stories. But someone needs to tell you those stories. And I'm doing my best to tell you as many of those stories as I can through Congressional Dish. But I can't do that if I'm dependent on their money too. I can't do that if I become a part of that corrupt ecosystem too. This show can't be like this and can't tell you these stories and name names and name companies if companies and lawmakers are my customers. I want my customer to be you. This show is good because it's created for you. And the minute I take advertising money, that's over. You know, do you want this podcast tailored to please company executives and lawmakers? Or do you want the information that I'm finding to be unfiltered? If you choose unfiltered, now you understand why I can't do this the normal way. Now you understand why direct payments, these are my only option if I want to produce this show. If I want to produce Congressional Dish honestly and independently. I can't be funded by a few companies that can pull the rug out from under me and destroy my income if I say something that doesn't work for them. And so I'm sorry for calling you a freeloader for not understanding that. I know it's a new concept, and I know I need to be more empathetic to that. My frustration is my problem. I know that I need to earn your trust to earn your money and friendship. I get that. But I also need you to understand that it goes both ways, which is why I'm not sharing my personal life, my podcasting decisions, and my unpolished political thoughts with everyone anymore. You have to understand that I'm potentially speaking to the entire world when I speak into this microphone and publish these episodes. I don't know the people on the other end of this, and I've been blindsided too many times by harsh words coming from strangers who think they know me. It's scary, honestly. And so I need to be more exclusive with who I confide in, with who I trust, which is why I've moved that kind of stuff, the more personal stuff, the more unformed, unpolished stuff behind a paywall. And the thing is that you are more than welcome behind the paywall. You're welcome in my green room. It's not that exclusive of a club. I want you in there, but I need some kind of gesture of good faith to show me that you're someone who I can trust. And when I see your name and or email attached to a payment, you are no longer a complete stranger to me. Your payment takes our relationship to the next level. Because the way I see it is that someone who pays me for my work, who has taken the time to listen to it and share it and part with your hard-earned money to support it, you're someone I'm willing to trust more because the investment in our relationship with your payment becomes a two-way thing. And so that's how it's going to be. So if you want to hear more about my life as a digital nomad, if you want to be someone that I listen to when it comes to the direction that I'm taking the podcast in, if you want to hear more, you know, eventually I'm going to be putting interviews and stuff behind the paywall and just my random thoughts about whatever I see in the world. I mean, traveling right now, I'm in Europe. I'm recording this in a studio in Porto, Portugal. It's absolutely amazing here. But I am noticing like cultural differences that I want to comment on. That's the type of stuff that you can find in the green room. And to give you a little taste of what I'm talking about, I will throw a little green room preview in at the end of this episode. And all you have to do to get into my green room is pay. Now, the easiest way to get in there is Patreon. And I have not set a very high financial barrier. $1 an episode gets you in. That's all you have to pay. But we also accept PayPal and the Cash App and checks and Zelle and Venmo. I mean, you know all of the payment methods by now. You can find them on every episode's show notes on congressionaldish.com. But Patreon's the easiest and fastest way to get the green room. We have a jerry-rigged way to get it for everyone else who pays. But that's what you have to do to have more access to me. And I hope now that you can understand why it's like this, you know? And again, I am sorry that I called you freeloaders. I shouldn't call anyone names. It's not nice. And I hope we understand each other better now. And I hope you understand why ads are not an option and why I'm not sharing as much with everyone on the internet anymore. It's nothing personal. I just don't know you. I hope you can understand. And before you leave, just real quick, I would like to thank our new executive producer. This person would like to remain anonymous, which is totally fine. But we do have an executive producer for episode 134, the EpiPen hearing, which I think is just so appropriate to announce on this particular episode. Now, if you're new to my world here, executive producers are people who pay at least $535 every time you pay $535, which was picked because that's $1 for every member of Congress. But every time you pay that, that pays a significant portion of the production costs for an episode. And so you can become an executive producer and have your name, your vouch, your credit put on an episode of your choice that you're particularly proud to have co-produced with me. And you can do this as many times as you want. We actually have a few people that have more than one executive producer credit. But this one is anonymous and it came with a message. And our executive producer said, "Hi, Jen. I was excited to see you dropped another episode. I thought after Nicaragua, I would have to wait until January for a new episode. Ukraine was both timely and excellent. Nobody else is connecting the dots related to these appointed people who move in and out of positions of power and wealth like Victoria Nuland. The same when they call experts to testify to Congress on war posture. And those called are all board members of war profiteers or sit on some pro-war think tank or both. I would like an executive credit for episode 134, the EpiPen hearing. It is damning that in the 2016 Congress held hearings about the blatant price gouging on life-saving pharmaceutical products, and yet over 6 years later, with a Democratic majority and a Democratic president, we're not able to even pass legislation which would allow price negotiations on drugs. To add insult to injury, the father of greedy pharma CEO and chief lobbyist featured in your episode is the one holding up the law. Can it be more blatant and obvious than that? Thank you for the archive of excellent information to refer to at times like these." Well, thank you for supporting the show, but especially that episode, because I haven't mentioned that episode in years. And yet we're announcing this on the day where I mention that Joe Manchin's daughter is the CEO of the company that is price gouging people on EpiPens. Like, what a weird coincidence is that? But yes, Joe Manchin has been the reason why so many things that the Democrats promised they were going to do are not getting done, because he is so in the pocket of these multinational corporations that he's just not allowing it past him. So yeah, Joe Manchin, man, that guy sucks. So yeah, I'm happy to have an executive producer vouch for that episode. And again, if you would like to be an executive producer, if you would like to be in the green room, I want as many people to join me as possible. So go to the show notes on congressionaldish.com, where, by the way, I give you all my sources because, like I said, I earn your trust. I don't expect it to just be given to me. So yeah, check out the sources and do your own reading. And if you appreciate the work that goes into this, please pay for it. And if you do decide to pay for it, you will be welcome into the green room. And so now, as promised, here is a green room preview. This is an episode that I recorded into my phone as I was walking the dog around Lisbon. At least I think I was walking the dog. I can't remember, but I was walking around Lisbon, and here is one of the stories I told. There's more to this, so if you want to hear the rest of this episode, just the fastest way right now is to definitely contribute whatever you think is fair per episode on Patreon, and you can get access to the rest of this. But yeah, here's a preview. I hope you enjoy.
Yesterday, we were walking here with Abs, and there were these people that walked by us, and they had two dogs, one on a leash and one that wasn't. The dog was it was a big dog, but I want to say it was like a lab. Yeah, like a really sweet dog, but off its leash. And so we walk up to this park, and I notice that there's two cops standing right in the middle of the pedestrian section. And immediately, my heart started beating faster because this guy had his dog off a leash. And we're in the middle of a city next to major roads. I just assumed like that wouldn't be allowed because I was living in the Bay Area in Alameda. And one of the things that happened while I was living there, and I lived across the street from a state park, and I knew that they didn't allow off-leash dogs. There was a dog park there, but like, it wasn't allowed. And I saw with like 10 of my friends, this chick that walked by us, just like this guy here in Portugal, with an off-leash dog. Dog was friendly, it was fine. And a cop in an SUV pulled over, yelled at her to put the dog on a leash. She had trouble getting it, and I know she like talked back to the cop. She said something to him. And he went over, grabbed her, and threw her up on the hood of the car, arrested her, and brought her out to Dublin, which is driving, I'm going to say Dublin is at least, with no traffic, a 30-minute drive. And this was like peak rush hour. I mean, it might have been a Saturday, I don't know, but like at least a 30-minute drive away. And didn't tell her friend where she was going. Just like arrested her for an unleashed dog in a pretty violent way. Yeah, and we were like yelling at him the whole time, being like, let her go. He didn't give a fuck that we were watching. So here I'm in like a very similar situation. Dude walks by, has this big lab off leash, 2 cops standing right there with nothing to do. And we walk right by the cops, and I kind of like walk away a little bit because I don't want to be near any of it. And one of the cops leans down and calls the dog over. And the dog walks over to the cop, and the cop leans down and gives him like a big old noogie and like makes the sounds you make to dogs, like and then waved to the dude, and they walked on. And then in the middle of the park there were dozens of dogs jumping over a hedge. I put it in my Instagram story. They're super cute. And these cops just continued doing nothing. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm out of America, which is a really sad moment to have documenting in my head when I finally felt like I wasn't in the States. And that's what it was. When I was like, okay, I'm back in a place where the cops they're just not violent like that here. They're just not. Like, if you're minding your own business, I feel more free here, which is frustrating to me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little green room preview. Again, if you want to hear the rest of that episode or want to hear other episodes like it that are there now and will be in the future, please pledge whatever you think is fair on Patreon to get immediate access, or pay us and then email Lauren at congressionaldish.com. And when she gets a chance, she'll give you our jerry-rigged way of giving you our private feed. But Patreon's definitely the easiest. All right, so I'm going to get back to reading the rest of this infrastructure law, and I will talk to you again the next time I find a rabbit hole. All right, take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if the lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.